I'm going to tell you about two sisters. Not my sisters. I have one sister of my own, and she lives in Ibadan, and we speak on Sundays, and that is a separate story and a private one, and it is not what you are here for tonight. What you are here for tonight is Adiz and Obiajili Chakwu of Houston, Texas, and specifically what happened at the Nigerian Ghanaian Women's Social Circle annual dinner in October of last year, when a retired pharmacist set down her fork and said something that changed the temperature of a room full of 63 women in the span of about 45 seconds. I was that pharmacist. If you're interested in this gist, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments, and I will give you a heart. My name is Adora Mensah. I am 58 years old. My mother was Yoruba. My father was Ghanaian. I was raised in Lagos, and I have lived in Houston since 2005. I spent 31 years as a pharmacist, 22 of them in clinical practice, the last 9 in hospital administration, before I retired in 2021. I know the Chakwu sisters from the Women's Social Circle, where I have been a member for 11 years and where I have sat in the same room as both of them at enough monthly meetings to know, with the specific certainty of a woman who spent 3 decades measuring compounds, exactly how much of what I was observing was accurate and how much required further verification. I am precise by training and by temperament. I do not say things I cannot support. I do not make claims I cannot document. And I do not set down my fork at a dinner table in front of 63 women unless I am absolutely certain of what I am about to say. I was absolutely certain. I want to tell you what I knew, how I knew it, and what happened when I said it out loud. I want to tell you all of it because partial information is the thing that has been circulating in our community for the past several months, and partial information is almost always more dangerous than the full picture. Here is the full picture. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Tell me in the comments. I want to know who is in the room for this. The Chakwu family came to Houston from Enugu in 1998. The father, Mr. Emeka Chakwu, worked in civil engineering for a mid-sized firm in the energy corridor. The mother, Mrs. Ngozi Chakwu, taught primary school for 12 years before transitioning to private tutoring when the family schedule required more flexibility. They were a modest family, organized, the kind of household where the children understood, without being told directly, that how the family appeared in public was a matter of collective responsibility, that what you said and wore and how you carried yourself reflected not just on you, but on the unit, and the unit expected to be represented well. I know the Chakwu family the way I know most families in our community, through proximity, observation, and the specific intelligence that accumulates when you are in the same social circle as a person's mother for several years. Mrs. Ngozi Chakwu joined the Women's Social Circle in 2010, 1 year before I did. She was a quiet member, consistent. She brought very good chin-chin to every meeting she hosted, and she had the specific dignity of a woman who has worked hard for everything she has and intends to keep working. She had 2 daughters. Obiajili, Obi as everyone called her, was the eldest. Born 1986. She was, from the accounts of people who knew her in those early years, the kind of child who arrives in a room and the room adjusts. Not because she demanded it, because she was beautiful and warm and funny in the quick, generous way that draws people without effort on the part of the person drawing them. She was the child teachers remembered, the child neighbors mentioned, the child whose school photographs Mrs. Ngozi framed and placed prominently in the sitting room. Adiz was the second, born 1989, 3 years younger. She was, by all accounts I have gathered, also lovely in her own way. Quieter, steadier, the kind of person you notice more in the absence than in the presence. She did well in school without drama about it. She was not the child teachers mentioned first when parents asked. She was not the child whose photographs occupied the prominent positions on the mantelpiece. She was the second daughter in a family that had organized itself around the first one, and she occupied that position with the specific equilibrium of a person who has looked honestly at the available space and decided to build something real within it rather than spend energy arguing about the dimensions. I want you to hold that detail. Not bitterness, not resentment, equilibrium. The choice to build within the space rather than fight about the space. It is a distinction that matters, and we will come back to it. Obi Chukwu was a marketing coordinator for a mid-size events company when I first met her at the Women's Circle in 2013. She was 27 years old. She dressed with care, not expensively, but with a specific attention to presentation that communicates effort and self-regard and the understanding that appearance is a language worth learning. She had a 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown Houston, on the 4th floor of a building with a doorman and a gym, $1,450 a month. The kind of address that tells a story about the life you are presenting before you have said a word about it. She was the kind of member the Women's Circle values. She remembered names. She asked follow-up questions at the next meeting about things you had mentioned at the previous one, which is a social skill that most people have the intention of and few people have the discipline of. She volunteered for event planning committees and followed through, which is rarer than the volunteering. She had a laugh that arrived suddenly and fully and made the table she was sitting at more enjoyable. And I say that as a woman who does not bestow that observation easily. I liked her. I want to establish that before anything else, because what I am about to tell you requires a baseline, and the baseline is I liked Obi Chukwu. I found her good company. I found her warm in the ways that social settings permit warmth. What I am telling you tonight is not produced by dislike or by any personal grievance between us. It is produced by what I know and what I believe a full accounting of events requires. She lost her job in March of 2019. The events company restructured. A business decision, not a performance one. The industry had been softening before the larger difficulties of 2020 arrived and accelerated everything. And Obi's elimination was part of a broader reduction that took several positions with it. She told the Women's Circle at the April meeting. She delivered the information with the composed professionalism of a woman who has decided that how she presents bad news is as important as the news itself, perhaps more important. She said she had been let go as part of a restructuring. She said she was taking it as an opportunity. She had been considering consulting work for some time. Perhaps this was the push she needed. Several members expressed support. Several offered contacts. I noted, filing it quietly, that at the subsequent 3 meetings no mention was made of the consulting work having materialized into anything specific. She found another position 8 months later, a marketing manager role at a smaller company. She mentioned it at the December meeting with the energy of someone reporting a fact rather than celebrating a development. She had the position for 7 months before the company folded. By February 2020, Obi Chukwu was without income for the second time in 11 months. She was 33 years old. She had the Midtown apartment. She had the social life, the wardrobe, the presence on social media that continued documenting a life that appeared to be proceeding exactly as designed. She was 3 months behind on rent. None of the 63 women in the social circle knew what February of 2020 actually looked like behind that apartment door. None of them except one. Let me tell you about Adiz Chukwu properly, because she has not been told about properly in the version of this story that has been circulating, and the telling is overdue. Adiz was 30 years old in February of 2020. She worked in hospital administration at Memorial Hermann, patient billing coordination, which is precise, detailed, thankless work that keeps a large institution's financial operations running and receives no ceremony for doing so. Her salary was not something I know exactly. but hospital administrators at that level in Houston earn somewhere between $50,000 and $65,000 a year. I know this because I spent 9 years in hospital administration myself, and I know the compensation structures. She had a one-bedroom apartment in Missouri City, about 30 minutes from central Houston. A clean, adequate building. Nothing distinctive about it except that it was hers, maintained consistently, paid on time. She drove a 2011 Toyota Camry with 140,000 miles on it that she had purchased used in 2014 and maintained with the specific care of someone who cannot afford to replace a car and therefore takes care of the one she has. I want you to sit with the picture for a moment. One bedroom in Missouri City. Hospital administrator's salary. 2011 Camry with 140,000 miles. This is not a woman with surplus. This is a woman who has organized her life carefully within specific financial constraints and who, within those constraints, has been responsible and steady and entirely without the visible apparatus of someone who is going to do what she did. Because what she did required money she did not have to spare. And she did it anyway. I observed Adiz at women's circle events over 11 years, and I want to tell you what I observed because it is relevant and because the narrative that developed about her in our community is so opposite to what I observed that it requires the correction of specificity. She was quiet, not withdrawn. There is a difference, and I know the difference after 58 years and 31 in clinical settings. Withdrawn is an absence. Quiet is a choice. Adiz chose to listen more than she spoke, which in a room full of women who have a great deal to say is a specific discipline. She asked good questions when she asked them. She remembered things. She was in the limited way that social settings permit you to know someone, a person of substance. What she was not was jealous. What she was not was small. What she was not was the thing she was going to be called for 2 years by people who had no idea what she was quietly doing with her money every month while they said it. I am going to tell you how I found out about the arrangement because how I found out is part of the story and I want to account for it precisely. His name is Mr. Kwame Osei. He is Ghanaian. He owns several residential properties in Houston, including the building in Midtown where Obi has her apartment. I know him from the Ghanaian Community Association, where he has been a member for 15 years, and where he has the reputation of a man who is straightforward in his business dealings, fair with his tenants, and not given to unnecessary complication. We were at the Community Association Spring Function in March of last year, a garden event at a member's property in Sugar Land. Pleasant evening. I was standing near the refreshments table, which is, and I mention this for the benefit of anyone who has not yet learned it, always the correct place to stand at any Nigerian or Ghanaian social gathering if you want to understand what is actually happening in the community. People filling their plates are briefly distracted and briefly honest. Mr. Osei came to get a drink. We exchanged the standard greetings, and then he said, I have been meaning to speak to someone about something. Do you know the Chakwu sisters from the women's circle? I said I did. He told me everything. In February of 2020, he received a phone call from a woman who identified herself as Adiz Chakwu, the younger sister of his tenant Obi Ajili Chakwu. He had never spoken with Adiz before. She explained, simply and without drama, that her sister was behind on rent and was going through a difficult period and that she wanted to help. She asked him what the total outstanding balance was. He told her. She asked him to send her his bank transfer details. She said she would cover the arrears immediately and then continue paying monthly until her sister was in a position to resume payments herself. And then she asked him one thing. She asked him not to tell Obi where the money was coming from. She said her sister was proud and would refuse the help if she knew the source. She asked him to tell Obi that her account had been brought current through a housing assistance program that the building participated in. Mr. Osei told me he stood at his desk for a moment after the call ended and thought about it. He said he has been a landlord for 22 years, and in 22 years, he has had many conversations with tenants and with families of tenants and with people who wanted to help tenants, and he said this call was unlike any of them. He said most people who call to cover someone else's rent have conditions. They want to be told when the payments are acknowledged. They want some form of accountability for the money. They want the person being helped to know they have a benefactor. Adiz asked for none of that. She asked only for the bank details and the silence. He called Obi. He told her the housing assistance story. Obi said thank God and asked no further questions. Mr. Osei said in telling me this that he was not entirely surprised that Obi did not investigate further. He said people generally do not pull on threads that they are afraid might unravel the thing they need to remain intact. The transfers began the following month, $1,450 on the 15th of every month. Direct bank transfer from an account in the name of a DC, Chukwu, for 4 years. I want you to do this arithmetic with me because I think the number needs to be heard at full size. $1,450 per month, 12 months per year. For years, $69,600. A woman in a 2011 Camry with 140,000 miles on it, earning a hospital administrator's salary from a one-bedroom apartment in Missouri City, sent $69,600 to her sister's landlord over 4 years, without being asked, without condition, without telling anyone. Mr. Osei said he had been carrying this information for 4 years with increasing discomfort. He said he had watched the narrative about Adiz develop in the community. He had heard it from multiple people through the Nigerian Ghanaian social network that connected all of us. And he said each time he heard Adiz described as jealous or small or resentful, he thought about the 15th of the month. He thought about the transfer arriving as it always arrived on time, without note, without acknowledgement required. He said he had stayed quiet because the arrangement was not his to disclose. But he said he was tired of watching a good woman be described as jealous by the person she was keeping housed. He said, I am telling you because you are a precise woman and you will know what to do with it. I thanked him. I went home. I want to tell you what I thought about on the drive home from Sugarland that night, because I think it matters for understanding everything that followed. I thought about the phone call. February 2020. Adiz calling a landlord she had never spoken to, for a sister who had not asked for help, to set up an arrangement that cost nearly half her take-home income with no end date discussed and no conditions attached. I thought about what it takes to make that phone call. Not the money, I mean the decision. The specific internal architecture of a person who looks at a situation and decides, without being asked, without any guarantee of acknowledgement, that this is the correct thing to do, and they are going to do it. I have spent 58 years around people. 31 of those years in clinical settings where you see people under conditions that reveal who they actually are rather than who they present themselves to be. You learn, over that time, to recognize the specific quality of a decision that comes from character rather than calculation. A calculated decision has a structure you can see if you look for it. It knows what it wants in return, even if the return is subtle. Even if the return is just the feeling of having done something generous. There is always a transaction. What Adiz did in that phone call had no transaction that I could identify. She was not building credit. She was not protecting her relationship with her parents by keeping their eldest daughter housed. She was not positioning herself for inheritance or family standing or any other form of return. She was simply, as far as I could determine, and I am a woman who looks for the transaction, doing the thing she thought was right for her sister. And then she told no one and went back to Missouri City. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about it for 6 months. I sat with it for 6 months. I want to ask you something before we continue. Somewhere in the 4 years of this arrangement, somewhere between the first transfer in March 2020 and the last one in January 2024. Adiz must have had moments of doubt, moments where the cost of it, financial and personal, came close enough to the surface that she had to make the decision again. Not once, repeatedly. I want to know if you think she ever came close to stopping. Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you think was in her mind on those nights when the transfer was due and the narrative about her jealousy had just reached her somehow through the network, and the car needed a repair, and the one bedroom was quiet, and she sat down to enter the bank details one more time. Tell me what you think kept her doing it, because I have my answer. And at the end of this story, I will share it. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. You now know what Adiz was doing. You know $69,600. You know the car and the apartment and the salary and the transfers arriving quietly on the 15th of every month. You know she told no one and asked for nothing and continued paying through year 1 and year 2 and year 3 and into year 4. What would you have done? And I want to be specific about the question. Not just would you have helped. The helping, that part, I think many of us understand. When someone we love is in difficulty, we find the help from wherever the help can come from, and we give it because the alternative is watching them fall, and that is not something most people can choose. So the helping I understand. What I want to know is whether you would have stayed quiet for 4 years, while the person you were helping built a public persona on the foundation of what you were quietly providing. While that person in the same community where you lived and had your social life and your reputation began describing you as jealous, while the description settled into the community's understanding of you, and you said nothing and continued sending the money on the 15th. Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Because I asked myself this question every month for 6 months after Mr. Osei told me, and I arrived at a different answer each time. Here is what Obiajili Chakwu presented to the Women's Social Circle of Houston between February 2020 and October 2023. She called it her reinvention period. She named it that at a meeting in late 2020 with the confident ease of a woman who has decided that naming a difficult thing on her own terms is better than allowing others to name it for her. She said she had used the first part of the year to reassess. The period of unemployment had clarified for her what she actually wanted from her professional life. She was done taking whatever the market offered and was now building deliberately toward what she had always wanted, which was independence, flexibility, work that was hers rather than someone else's. She mentioned freelance consulting. The clients were there, she said. The work was real. The flexibility was, finally, what she had always wanted. She said this at 3 consecutive meetings, each time with the same assurance, each time without specifics that could be questioned. I noted the consistency of the assurance and the absence of the specifics. In 31 years of clinical practice, a patient who describes their health in consistent, confident terms, but becomes vague when asked for specifics has learned that vagueness is safer than precision. I filed it. On social media, she was present and active. Photographs from restaurants whose names I recognized as the kind that require planning to attend. Photographs from events, gallery openings, birthday celebrations, a rooftop venue that I was told cost a significant amount per person to attend. Photographs inside the apartment, which appeared in them exactly as it appeared in real life. Well-appointed, comfortable, a home that communicates stability and taste. The kind of apartment you photograph yourself in because the apartment is part of the image you are building. The apartment that Adiz $1,450 was paying for every month. At meetings, Obi was unchanged in the ways the women's circle valued. She remembered names. She was warm. She was funny. She was the version of herself that had always made rooms better to be in. Whatever was happening privately, the surface was held. And somewhere in year 2, I believe it was late 2021, based on when I first heard the comment that opened it, she began to construct a narrative about Adiz. I am going to be careful here, and I ask you to receive this section carefully because I am about to describe a process that I observed, but whose motivations I can only infer. What I observed is this. At a women's circle meeting in late 2021, October, I believe, I would have to check my notes. Obi made a comment about her sister during a conversation about family relationships. The comment was not the centerpiece of the conversation. It was an aside. She said something about Adiz having always struggled with Obi's social life, her visibility, the way people responded to her. She said it with the mild, slightly tired patience of someone describing a long-standing dynamic that they have accepted but not resolved. The comment was small. It planted itself. At the following meeting, in the context of a different conversation, Obi mentioned that her relationship with Adiz had become strained. She said she thought Adiz had carried resentment from childhood, the older sister receiving more attention, and Adiz not quite being able to move past it as an adult. She said she had tried to address it and found that Adiz was not open to the conversation. She said all of this without venom. That was what made it effective. Venom is easy to dismiss. It tells the listener that the speaker has a stake and the information should be weighted accordingly. Obi said it with sadness, with the measured, slightly resigned quality of a woman who loves her sister and cannot change who her sister is. The language of someone who has done the work and found that the other party has not. Several women at that meeting nodded. Several offered observations from their own experience with jealous siblings. The conversation moved on, but the impression remained. One woman in particular, Chisholm, became what I can only describe as an active amplifier of the narrative. Chisholm had been Obi's closest social ally in the circle for 3 years, and she had the specific enthusiasm for other people's family grievances that some people carry into middle age without examining. She mentioned the Adiz situation at meetings Obi did not attend. She elaborated on it in the sidebar conversations that happen at the edges of any gathering. She added texture, small details, plausible elaborations, the kind of accretion that turns a comment into a consensus without anyone quite deciding to make it one. By early 2023, the consensus in a meaningful portion of our social network was settled. Adiz Chakwu was jealous of her sister. She was small-spirited. The distance between them was Adiz's doing, Adiz's limitation, Adiz's inability to celebrate someone else's life when that life was more visible and more admired than her own. The woman driving the 2011 Camry, who had been sending $1,450 to the landlord every month for 3 years. That was who was being described as jealous. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not with outrage. Outrage is easy and not what this situation requires. Sit with it clearly. The person paying for the apartment being described as jealous of the person living in it. The specific, particular inversion of that. The audacity of it if it was deliberate. The tragedy of it if it was simply how Obi had reorganized the story in order to live with it. I do not know which of those it was. I have my suspicion. I want to slow down and tell you what year 3 looked like from the outside, because by year 3 the shape of the situation had become, to anyone paying close attention, something that required a name. Obi was presenting well. The reinvention had evolved in its narrative. By 2022, she was describing herself as building a personal brand in the events and lifestyle space, which was a reframing of the consulting that had never fully materialized, but a credible reframing. She had a presence on social media that had grown. She was posting content about Houston's social scene, restaurant reviews, event coverage, the kind of content that costs primarily time and access rather than money, and both of those Obi had. She was being invited to events as a guest rather than a paying attendee. The apartment in Midtown, which photographed beautifully and which she had lived in long enough to make genuinely her own in terms of decoration and arrangement, was appearing in her content as backdrop. She had found a way to turn the life that Adiz was paying for into a platform. I do not say that with judgment, or rather, I say it with the specific judgment of a woman trying to understand the situation clearly rather than simply. Because the truth is that what Obi built in those 4 years was not nothing. The social presence was real. The network of Houston event organizers and restaurant owners who knew her name was real. Whatever income it was generating, and I do not know the exact figure, was real. She was building something. The foundation of what she was building was invisible to everyone who saw the building. The foundation was Adiz's $1,450 arriving on the 15th of every month. At the Women's Circle, the jealousy narrative had by year 3 the status of settled history. Not something people actively discussed, but something everyone knew. The way you know things about community members that have been discussed enough times to become simply the agreed-upon truth about a person. Adiz was the jealous one, the difficult one, the one who could not be happy for her sister. Adiz came to the June 2022 meeting. I watched her at that meeting knowing what I knew. Mr. Osei had told me 3 months earlier, and it was a different experience from all the previous meetings. Watching a person be described in the sidebar conversations of a room, while knowing that the description is precisely inverted from the truth, is a specific and uncomfortable experience. I sat with it. I continued sitting with it. I had made my decision that I would wait for the right moment, and I held to it. Adiz sat at the table and listened and participated and drove home to Missouri City afterward in her 2011 Camry. She had sent the May payment 2 weeks earlier. She would send the June payment in 3 weeks. She said nothing. Nothing. That is the complete answer. Nothing. Whatever Adiz knew about the narrative circulating about her, and given the size of the network and the 4 years over which it developed, I believe she knew something, perhaps not the full shape of it, but the outline. She said nothing. She did not attend every meeting. When she attended, she was present in her usual way, quiet, steady, listening more than speaking. She did not address the narrative directly. She did not defend herself. She did not, as far as I can determine, say anything to anyone about what she was doing with her money every month. She continued sending the transfers. I have thought about this more than I have thought about almost anything in this story. I have tried to understand what kind of person continues to do what Adiz did under those circumstances, continues to pay, continues to be quiet, continues to absorb the description of herself as jealous and small while the evidence of what she actually was arrived in a landlord's account on the 15th of every month. What I have arrived at is this. I think Adiz had decided before any of the narrative developed what kind of help she was giving. I think she decided at the very beginning, possibly in the phone call to Mr. Osei, possibly before it, that the help was unconditional. That unconditional meant without acknowledgement, without gratitude required, without the right to be defended when the person being helped chose to rewrite the story. Unconditional means what it says, without condition, including the condition that you are treated fairly in return. That is an unusual decision for a person to make. It is an unusual thing to sustain for 4 years while the person you are helping calls you jealous in the social spaces you share. I do not think most people could do it. I do not know if I could do it. But I think Adiz Chukwu did it. And I think the reason she did it was not weakness and was not absence of feeling and was not an inability to stand up for herself. I think it was a form of knowing who she was, knowing what she was doing and why, knowing that what someone else said about her in a women's circle meeting could not change what was actually happening on the 15th of every month. The record was accurate even when the narrative was not. She kept the record. I want to spend a moment on the arithmetic of Adiz's life during those 4 years because I think the number $69,600 is large enough to be abstract, and I want to make it concrete. A hospital administrator in Houston earning $60,000 a year takes home, after taxes and health insurance and the standard deductions, approximately $38,000 to $40,000. Call it 39. That is $39,000 a year to cover rent, food, transport, clothing, utilities, phone, the occasional medical expense, the social obligations of a Nigerian woman in a community that has standards for participation, and whatever small pleasures a person on a careful budget allows herself. Her own rent in Missouri City was, I have been told, approximately $850 a month. Call it $10,200 a year. Her car payment was finished by 2018. So in the 4 years of the arrangement, she was not carrying that cost, but she was carrying maintenance on a car with high mileage, which is its own consistent expense. She was sending $1,450 a month to Mr. Osei's account. That is $17,400 a year. On a take-home of approximately $39,000, she was sending 44% of her annual take-home income to her sister's landlord. 44%. Let me say what that means practically. It means she was not saving at any meaningful rate. It means when something unexpected happened, a car repair, a medical bill, an appliance that needed replacing, she absorbed it from the same income that had already allocated nearly half of itself to Midtown Houston. It means the one bedroom in Missouri City was not a choice made from limited ambition. It was the accommodation of a budget that had a very large and very private line item that nobody could see. It means the 2011 Camry with 140,000 miles was not neglect. It was arithmetic. I want you to understand that I am not telling you this to produce outrage. Outrage is a feeling, and feelings, in my experience, are less useful than clarity. I am telling you this to be clear about what it cost, about what the number behind the number was, about what it looks like when a person with specific, real financial constraints makes a specific, real decision to sustain a sacrifice that no one will acknowledge. For 4 years, I sat on what Mr. Osei told me from March until October. I want to account for those 6 months. I am not a woman who acts without deliberation, and I do not want you to think what happened at the dinner was impulsive. It was the conclusion of 6 months of considering every possible version of what to do with this information. I considered going to Adiz directly. I decided against it because Adiz already knew what she was doing and why, and had decided how she wanted to handle it. My knowledge of the arrangement was not something she needed. She had made her choices with full awareness. The information was not useful to her. I considered going to OB directly, a private conversation, away from the social setting. I held this option for some time because it was the most conservative intervention, and I value conservative interventions. A pharmacist learns early that the minimum effective dose is always preferable to the maximum one. But I kept coming back to the fact that OB had been building and maintaining a narrative for 2 years in a community setting and a private conversation, however clearly I spoke, could be managed in ways that a public one could not. The narrative was public. The correction, I concluded, needed to be public. I considered saying nothing, allowing time and circumstance to produce whatever resolution they would produce. This is the option I held longest because it is the least intrusive, and because I am, fundamentally, a precise woman who understands that not every imbalance requires external correction. Some things correct themselves. I waited to see if this one would. By October, I had concluded that it would not. The narrative was settled. Adiz had been decided. The money was still being sent. Nothing in the situation was moving toward correction on its own. I decided I would speak if the moment came. The moment came. The Nigerian Ghanaian Women's Social Circle annual dinner is our largest event. This past October, it was held at a hotel banquet hall on Westheimer. 63 women at round tables, formal dress, 3 courses, speeches, awards, the particular energy of a gathering where everyone has made an effort and the shared acknowledgement of the effort creates a warmth that monthly meetings in someone's sitting room cannot quite replicate. I arrived at 7:15. I found my seat, noted my sight line to the other tables, and began the work of being present in the way that the event required. Obi was at table 4, center of the room. She was in a green dress that I will say plainly was beautiful on her. She was in good form, animated, laughing, the full version of herself that the room had always responded to. Chisholm was at the same table, on Obi's right, in the position of a person who has arrived where she expected to be and is comfortable there. Adiz was also at table 4. This was less usual. She came to the annual dinner more reliably than the monthly meetings, but not always. She was in a dark blue dress. She was, as she always was, quieter than her sister. She participated in the table conversation without leading it. She ate her first course. She listened. I was 2 tables away, positioned at an angle that gave me a clear view of table 4. I will not claim this was accidental. The dinner moved through its courses. The speeches were made. The awards were given. Between the second course and dessert, the service pauses. And in the pauses, conversations deepen at tables in the way they do when the formal structure relaxes and people begin saying what they actually think. I was watching table 4 during one of these pauses when the quality of the conversation there changed. I noticed it before I could hear the words, a shift in body posture, a realignment of attention, the specific narrowing that happens at a table when something is being said that is not entirely comfortable for everyone present. Chisholm made a comment about Adiz's car. I caught the word Camry. I caught the laugh that followed it, not a genuine laugh, the performance of one, the social signal that something has been said with an edge, and that the speaker is inviting the table to ratify the edge. Obi laughed. I want to be accurate about that laugh. I do not believe it was a cruel laugh. I do not believe Obi sat at that table and made a calculated decision to participate in the humiliation of her sister. I think it was the laugh of someone who has been in a social current for long enough that the current carries them past the moment where they might have chosen differently. It was a fast laugh. It closed as quickly as it opened, but it happened. I looked at Adiz. She was looking at the tablecloth. I set down my fork. I want to pause here and tell you what it felt like to set that fork down in that room, because I think the feeling is relevant to understanding what came next. I am not an impulsive person. I have told you that. I spent 6 months deciding whether to speak. I had planned, to the extent that a person can plan for an unscripted moment, what I would say if the moment came. I had considered the room. I had considered the consequences. I had made a decision that was measured and deliberate and grounded in everything I knew about this situation and about the people in it. And then I watched Adiz look at the tablecloth after that laugh, and something in me finished deliberating. I want to be honest about that moment. It was not a rational calculation. It was the specific response of a woman who has spent 58 years watching people absorb things they should not have to absorb, and who has, in that time, become very certain about where the line is between observing and participating, between being a witness and being complicit. I was not willing to be complicit. I set down my fork. I will not dramatize this. I will tell you exactly what I said. I did not raise my voice. I am not a woman who raises her voice. I spoke at a volume sufficient for table 4 to hear clearly. The tables adjacent to table 4, given the acoustics of the room, and the natural quieting that happens when someone begins speaking with a particular quality of intention, also heard. That was not incidental. I said, I want to say something about Adiz and the car. The table turned toward me. I said, the car has 140,000 miles on it. I know because Adiz mentioned it once when we were discussing vehicle maintenance costs. She has had it since 2014. She has not replaced it because for the last 4 years she has been sending $1,450 a month to a landlord in Midtown to cover the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment. The apartment that a certain person at this table has been living in and photographing herself in and describing to this community as the product of her reinvention. I looked at OB when I said the last sentence. I said, the person who has been sending that money is a D's. $69,600 over 4 years. Direct bank transfer on the 15th of every month. I have this from the landlord himself, Mr. Kwame Osei, who has been carrying this information for 4 years and who is tired of watching a good woman be described as jealous by the person she is keeping housed. I said, I thought the table should know. I picked up my fork. The silence lasted approximately 8 seconds. I counted. 8 seconds is a long time in a room of 63 women. Long enough for the information to travel from the ears to the brain to the chest and begin doing whatever information of that kind does to a person. Long enough for the 40-odd women within hearing distance to look at each other and then look at the table and then look at Obi. Chisholm said nothing. She was looking at her plate. Obi did not break. I want to give her that because it is accurate and accuracy requires it. She did not have the expression of a person who has been caught and knows it. She had the expression of a person who has made a decision in the space of those 8 seconds and is going to hold the decision regardless of what the room does next. She said, Mr. Osei is confused. She said it clearly, steadily, without visible agitation. She said there was a housing assistance program. The building participates in it. This has nothing to do with the D's. I said, Mr. Osei described the arrangement in specific detail. The account name, the transfer amounts, the schedule. He was not confused. Obi said, I don't know why Kwame would say something like that. He has always been. She paused for precisely the right length of time, prone to mixing up his tendencies. He manages several buildings. It was a well-constructed response. I noted it professionally. She had identified the only available lever, the credibility of the source, and she was applying it without losing composure. Had she stopped there, the evening might have resolved into a contested claim that the room could not adjudicate. She did not stop there. She looked at Adiz. She said, you would have told me, wouldn't you? The room went quieter. That sentence was not addressed to me or to the table. It was addressed to her sister, and it was not a question. It had the structure of a question and the function of something else entirely. It was an invitation for Adiz to either confirm that the arrangement did not exist, which would be a lie, or to confirm that it did exist, which would require Adiz to say, in front of this room and this community, that she had spent 4 years paying quietly for a life her sister had presented as self-made. That she had absorbed the jealousy label without responding to it. That she had continued sending the money through all of it. The sentence was designed to make the truth cost more than it was worth to say out loud. I watched Adiz receive it. She looked at her sister, not with anger, not with the wounded expression of someone betrayed. With something I can only describe as recognition, the look of a person seeing, finally, clearly and completely, something they had already half known and had perhaps been waiting to see proven. She reached down for her handbag. She stood up. She looked at me briefly, not with gratitude, not with accusation, with the steady acknowledgement of a person who has been seen and is still deciding how they feel about it. She looked at her sister one more time. She walked to the door. The door opened. The door closed. The room did not move for another 4 seconds. I counted those too. What happened in those 4 seconds was, I believe, the specific work of 63 women simultaneously revising something they had believed to be settled. The narrative about Adiz, the jealousy, the smallness, the inability to celebrate had been circulating in this room and in the wider network for 2 years. It had the status of accepted understanding. The kind of thing nobody questions, because enough people have repeated it without contradiction that it has become simply the agreed-upon shape of a particular truth. In 4 seconds, the shape changed. I watched it change. I watched it in the faces at the nearby tables, the subtle recalibration, the eyes moving between where D's had been sitting and where Obi was sitting, the small adjustments of expression that happen when a person is doing rapid internal arithmetic, and the sum is not coming out the way it previously came out. Chisholm was still looking at her plate. Obi was looking at the door. And in the specific stillness of a woman who has just watched the only leverage available to her be removed from the room by a person who has decided they are no longer available to be leveraged. In that stillness, I saw something I had not expected to see. Not defiance, not performance, something quieter than that. Something that looked from 2 tables away, in the imprecise light of a hotel banquet hall, like a person who has been in a story for 4 years and has just, for the first time, seen it from the outside. I may be wrong about what I saw. I am a precise woman, but I am not infallible, and Obi's interior state at that moment was not available for my inspection. What I know is what the room looked like. What I know is that Adiz walked out and did not come back. The room did not move for another 4 seconds. I counted those too. I will tell you what I know, and I will be clear about what I am inferring. Obi stayed at the dinner for 40 more minutes. I observed this. She did not leave immediately after Adiz. She stayed, and she maintained the surface composure of a woman who has decided that staying is itself a statement, that leaving would be a concession, and she was not making concessions that evening. I did not know what that cost her. I observed the surface, and the surface held. She called Adiz 4 times in the 2 days following the dinner. Adiz did not answer. I know this from a source close to Adiz that I trust completely. For days after the dinner, she sent a message to the family WhatsApp group, the one that includes their parents and several cousins. I have not seen the message directly. One of the cousins, who is a women's circle member, described it to me at the November monthly meeting. She said it was carefully worded. She said it read, to someone without the full context of the dinner, as a sister reaching out after a misunderstanding, extending grace, leaving a door open. She said it read, to someone who knew the full context, as something considerably more calculated than that. Adiz did not respond to the message. The monthly transfer, the one that had arrived on the 15th of every month for 48 consecutive months, did not arrive in February. Mr. Osei waited until the 22nd before calling. He told me about the call at the Ghanaian Community Association meeting in March, which is where this account ends. He said, I called to ask about the February payment. I said, what did she say? He said she told him she had assumed the housing assistance program was continuing to handle it. He said he explained to her that the program had concluded. He said there was a silence on the line. He said she asked how much was currently outstanding. He gave her the number. He said there was another silence. And then she said she would need some time to make arrangements. Mr. Osei told her he would give her 30 days. He said, I think she knew. I think when I said the program had concluded, she knew what that meant. She just needed a moment to find the words for the version she was going to tell next. He said it without judgment. He is a fair man. That is where the story ends. Not with a confrontation that produces resolution. Not with an apology delivered in a kitchen over Sunday breakfast. With a phone call about a missed payment, a 30-day notice, and a silence on the other end of a line that contained everything this story built toward, and nothing that the silence could be made to say out loud. I told you I would share what I think kept Adiz doing it. What kept her sending the transfer on the 15th through year 1 and year 2 and year 3 and into year 4. Through the jealousy narrative. Through the women's circle meetings where she was being discussed in her absence. Through the specific silence of a 1-bedroom apartment in Missouri City at the end of a day when the work was finished and the car was old and the bank balance had another $1,450 scheduled to leave it in a week. Here is what I think. I think Adiz Chakwu had decided, before the arrangement began and independent of anything that happened afterward, who she was. Not who she was in the community's eyes, or in her sister's narrative, or in the description circulating in the women's circle. Who she was in the only accounting that she had decided counted, her own. She was someone who did not leave her sister in an apartment she could not afford to lose because of pride. She was someone who made that call to Mr. Osei without being asked and set up the transfer without announcement and maintained it without condition. That was who she was. And I believe, this is my theory, the one I have been sitting with for a year, that she kept doing it not because she expected the situation to change, or the relationship to repair, or the narrative to correct itself. She kept doing it because stopping would have required her to become someone different from the person she had decided she was. Stopping in response to the jealousy narrative would have made the jealousy narrative matter. And she had decided it did not matter. Not because she was not hurt by it. I do not think she was indifferent to being described that way in the community she lived in. I think it cost her something. I think there were nights when it cost her something significant. But she had decided who she was, and she paid. Until October, when a retired pharmacist set a fork down at a dinner table, and the last reason to keep paying quietly became a reason to stop. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. The door closed. The February transfer did not arrive. And that, I think, was the most complete sentence Adiz Chakwu ever said to her sister. Not the walking out. Not the silence that followed. The absence of the transfer on the 15th. The first month in 48 months that the money did not come. That sentence said, I know who I am. I know what I did. And I have decided that the person who did it is no longer available to you. I do not know if Obi heard that sentence. I know Mr. Osei heard it. I think you heard it. I have been asked by several people since October whether I regret saying what I said at the dinner. My answer is precise. I regret only the setting. I am not a woman who enjoys spectacle. A smaller room, fewer witnesses, less performance, that would have been my preference. And I acknowledge that what happened at table 4 was not the clean, surgical intervention I had imagined when I made my decision back in March. It was messier than that. More public than I intended, with consequences I could not fully anticipate for everyone in that room, not just the 2 people it was about. But do I regret the saying of it? No, I do not. A pharmacist understands before almost anything else that the thing you do not dispense is not neutral. The withheld medication is not the absence of intervention. It is a different kind of intervention. The choice not to act has consequences the same way the choice to act does. It simply allows you to tell yourself, afterward, that you did not cause them. I was not willing to continue making that choice. Adiz Chakwu sent $69,600 to her sister's landlord. She sent it from a 1-bedroom in Missouri City in a car with 140,000 miles on it on a hospital administrator salary. She sent it for 4 years without condition, without announcement, without asking to be seen. She sent it while being described in the community she lived in as jealous and small and unable to celebrate the person she was keeping housed. And then she stood up from a table, picked up her bag, walked to a door, and left. I have been a precise woman for 58 years. I know what precision looks like when I see it. I set down my fork. I said what I knew. I picked it back up. My name is Adora Mensah. I measured things for 31 years. I know when something does not add up.